The door opens. The light shifts. And in that moment, that exact moment, Roddy McDowall lowers his camera and smiles. The woman across from him is the lead of the most expensive film ever made. She is wearing one of the most iconic costumes in cinema history. A gold headdress sits on her head. Her mouth is full. She is holding a sandwich with both hands, eyes still on the script page in front of her, the golden crown tilted slightly to one side. She has not heard him come in. She does not know anyone is watching. And that is exactly the point. The click of the shutter brings her head up. She chews. She swallows. She looks at Roddy with the particular calm of a woman who has been photographed 10,000 times and knows immediately when a photograph is going to be a problem. She speaks without raising her voice. "You are going to destroy that film." Roddy lowers the camera and answers without missing a beat. "On the contrary, I am going to frame it." That exchange lasted approximately 4 seconds. What it started lasted 55 years. If you want to understand what made Elizabeth Taylor different from every other icon of her era, you do not look at the Oscar speeches or the jewelry or the 8 marriages. You look at who was standing in that doorway on July 22, 1963, holding a camera, smiling at a woman with a crooked crown and a sandwich. Because that man saw something the world, for all its obsession with Elizabeth Taylor, never quite managed to see. He saw her when the performance was off. And he kept coming back for 55 years. In 1943, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was the most powerful studio in the world. It controlled everything, every contract, every image, every relationship its stars were permitted to have in public. What happened behind the studio gates was a different story. And it was behind those gates, on the set of a modest British production called Lassie Come Home, that 2 children were placed next to each other at a lunch table and, essentially, left to figure it out. Roddy McDowall was 14. He had been acting since he was 8, had already survived the transition from English studios to Hollywood, and possessed the quiet watchfulness of someone who had learned early that the machinery around him was not built for his benefit. Elizabeth Taylor was 11. She had arrived in America from England the year before, brought by a mother who had concluded with absolute certainty that this child belonged in front of a camera. Before Elizabeth had spoken a word on set, the violet eyes were already the subject of conversation. Roddy would say later that when he first saw her, he laughed. Not at her, simply because she was so extraordinary that laughter was the only reasonable response. They sat next to each other that first day. Both British, both MGM property. Both, in ways they could not yet fully articulate, entirely alone inside the machine that was supposed to be making them famous. The conversation that began at that lunch table in 1943 did not end until Roddy McDowall died 55 years later. In between, a camera was almost always part of it. The studio system of the 1940s was not designed for the people inside it. Child actors occupied a particularly strange position, valuable while young and manageable, a complication the moment they began to grow. Roddy navigated this quietly, moving into character work and stage acting, building a photographic career that would eventually earn him covers in Life, Vogue, and Look. Elizabeth's transition was louder. She was too striking to ignore and too strong-willed to manage, and MGM spent the better part of a decade trying to resolve this tension without success. Through all of it, the contract disputes, the early marriages, the health crises that arrived with the regularity of seasons, Roddy was there. Not as a strategist or an advisor. Simply as a person who showed up. He was at her first wedding. He was there in 1956 when Montgomery Clift was nearly killed in a car accident on a canyon road after leaving a dinner at Elizabeth's house, when she ran into the dark and held him until the ambulance came. He was there through the years when Elizabeth was becoming something the studio system genuinely could not contain. And through all those years, quietly and consistently, he was pointing a camera at her. By the early 1960s, Roddy had assembled a photographic archive spanning nearly 20 years of Elizabeth Taylor's life. Almost none of it had been published. That was exactly the point. These were not images for magazines. They were images for a different purpose entirely, the ongoing record of a friendship that had no official category and required none. By the time Cleopatra began production, Elizabeth Taylor had already been famous for 20 years. She had survived child stardom, navigated 3 marriages, and nearly died of pneumonia in London in 1961 in a crisis serious enough that certain newspapers began preparing obituaries. She arrived in Rome in 1962 as the most recognized woman on the planet. The city received her accordingly. The production itself was historic in all the wrong ways. The budget had reached figures that alarmed even veteran studio executives. The original director had been replaced. Elizabeth had fallen into a relationship with her married co-star Richard Burton that was being condemned by the Vatican and covered by international press with an intensity that seems almost impossible from a contemporary vantage point. 14,000 costumes had been constructed. $44 million was evaporating into the Roman summer. And Roddy McDowall had joined the production in an acting capacity, playing Octavian, and brought his camera, as he always did. By July of 1963, the shoot had been grinding forward for months under a pressure that had no single source. Everyone on set was tired. Everyone was managing something. It was in this atmosphere, spectacle, heat, scandal, exhaustion, that Roddy walked through a door on July 22 and found Elizabeth Taylor alone, in full Cleopatra regalia, eating lunch. He raised the camera. The shutter clicked. She looked up, and within approximately 4 seconds, the terms were established. He would frame it. She would destroy him. Neither of them meant the first statement literally, and both of them meant the second one completely. That evening, Roddy went to the darkroom. The photograph developed exactly as he had seen it through the viewfinder. Elizabeth caught mid-bite, headdress tilted, jewelry shifted, the sandwich unmistakably and permanently a sandwich. He had a print made at 50 by 70 centimeters. He placed it in a black frame with a white mat. In the lower corner he attached a small handwritten note, and then he walked down the corridor, hung the photograph on the door of Elizabeth's costume room, placed the key on its hook, and left. The note read, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, 69 BC to 1963 AD. The following morning, the costume crew arrived at 7:15 and found it immediately. They looked at it. They looked at each other. They said nothing. 3 more crew members arrived between 7:15 and 8. All of them stopped. All of them registered it. None of them touched it or said a word. Roddy arrived at 8:20 and walked past the photograph without appearing to look at it. He positioned himself at the far end of the corridor with a script he gave every appearance of reading. Elizabeth arrived at 8:50 with her coffee, not entirely awake. She stopped in the corridor. She looked at the photograph. She looked at the dates in the corner. Several seconds passed in complete silence. Then Elizabeth Taylor, Academy Award winner, lead of the most expensive film ever made, the woman whose face had appeared on the front pages of newspapers in 6 languages that same week, began to laugh. Not the calibrated laugh of a premiere or a press event. The real one. Uncontrolled, undignified, entirely genuine. Her coffee nearly went sideways. 3 crew members standing within earshot turned to look. The sound technician 2 rooms away said afterward that he had never heard her laugh like that on set, in months of production. Roddy raised the camera. He got the shot. The photograph stayed on the door for the rest of that day. Elizabeth left it there. Nobody moved it. 3 weeks later, a large package arrived at Roddy's apartment in Rome. No explanation, just Elizabeth's name on the outside. Inside, a handmade leather camera bag, a professional-grade lens still in its case, and a sealed envelope. The envelope contained 1 photograph. Roddy in full Octavian costume. Roman toga caught by a sudden gust and flipped entirely backward over his head, hair blown sideways, eyes closed, captured at the precise apex of a sneeze. He was completely airborne and completely helpless, and the image was technically flawless. On the reverse, in Elizabeth's handwriting, Octavian, Emperor of Rome, 63 BC. And this photograph, which arrives too late. Inside the camera bag, folded beneath the new lens, a small note. Do not put this in the next book. Roddy sat down on the floor and did not move for several minutes. His sister found him there later and asked what had happened. He handed her the photograph. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "How long has she been planning this?" Roddy said he did not know. That was the part that impressed him most. This was the rhythm of them for 55 years. Not grand public gestures. A photograph hung on a door. A package sent across a city. A note folded inside a camera bag. Comedic precision as the primary language of devotion. In 1968, Roddy published his first major photography book, Double Exposure, a collection of celebrity portraits assembled over 2 decades. Elizabeth appeared in several images, all of them quiet, none of them the obvious ones. The copy he sent her had a handwritten addition on the first page. The sandwich photograph waited 26 drafts. Patience. Elizabeth called him the same evening. The conversation lasted 2 hours and was, by all available accounts, almost entirely about other things. In 1978, Elizabeth arrived at an industry dinner and found an envelope at her place setting. Inside, a single photograph from 1943, the Lassie Come Home set, 2 children at a lunch table. On the back, in Roddy's handwriting, "We have come a long way from here. Both of us." She kept that photograph in her bag for the rest of the evening and did not discuss it with anyone present. In 1985, Roddy published a second major collection. The copy he sent Elizabeth contained one handwritten line beneath the printed dedication. "Both of you." She understood that he was including the version of her that had no formal public existence, the private one, the one that occasionally surfaced in Roman corridors with crooked crowns and sandwiches. She kept the book on her nightstand for years. The longest pause in the prank war came in 1983. That year, Roddy drove Elizabeth to the Betty Ford Center on a morning when she had decided, on her own terms, that she was ready. No publicist present, no family member selected for optics. Roddy, in a car, on a morning that neither of them ever described publicly in any detail. Elizabeth said later that what she remembered most about the drive was that Roddy talked the entire way about a photograph of a hummingbird in his garden and whether the color in the print was quite right. By the time the building appeared through the windshield, she had been so completely not addressed about where they were going that she was almost calm. On the day she was discharged, Roddy was waiting at the exit. He had a package. Inside, the 1963 photograph, the Cleopatra sandwich, in a gold frame. New note: Cleopatra has returned. In 1991, at a small dinner at Roddy's house, he gave Elizabeth a gift she kept beside her bed for the rest of her life. It was a photograph album assembled over years, 1 image per page, each with a handwritten caption. The images ran from 1943 to the present. Every version of her that existed. The last page was blank. At the bottom, in Roddy's handwriting, "This page is not finished. We are still going." In October of 1998, Roddy McDowall died of cancer at the age of 70. Elizabeth was present through the final months of his illness in the way she had always been present, showing up, calling, continuing the decades-long rhythm of a friendship that had outlasted 8 marriages and the entire arc of studio-era Hollywood. After the funeral, Dominic Dunn visited Elizabeth and wrote of that conversation afterward. He described the particular expression that came over her face when Roddy's name was mentioned. He called it the Elizabeth look. A fond smile at the corners of her mouth and something far away in her eyes. A journalist asked her to describe Roddy in a single moment. She did not choose the Cleopatra photograph or the Betty Ford morning or the 1943 lunch table. She said, "He showed up." That was the complete answer. He showed up. For 55 years, across 2 continents and multiple decades and 8 marriages and everything else, Roddy McDowall showed up without requiring credit and without making it about himself. In 2001, a selection of prints from Roddy's archive appeared at auction. Elizabeth was in the room. She bid on 1 lot without hesitation, outbidding everyone who entered the competition, and gave no sign of registering what it cost. It was a single print. Black frame, white matte, a woman in a gold headdress with a sandwich and a slightly crooked crown. Small handwritten note in the corner. The dates read 69 BC to 1963 AD. She took it home and put it in her bedroom. It stayed there until she died. When Elizabeth Taylor died in March of 2011, the people who went through her home found the photograph album on a shelf near her bed. The last page was still blank. Roddy's note was still there at the bottom. "This page is not finished. We are still going." He died in 1998. She died in 2011. The page never got filled. But the album had been kept close. And that is what 55 years of a friendship looks like when you reduce it to its essential object. 2 children at a lunch table in 1943. A camera, a sandwich, a crooked crown, and a blank page that neither of them ever needed to fill, because the story had never required an ending. It had only ever required that someone keep showing up. The 1963 photograph was donated to the Academy Museum in 2021 by Elizabeth's estate. The placard beneath it reads, "The best photograph is taken when the subject does not know anyone is watching."